Yes, sir. You already know what time it is. Time for Sports Talk with Naj, where we keep it real and authentic. Break down football, basketball, and soccer. So, hey, man, stay tuned. Follow us on the socials, and make sure you tell a friend. Yes, sir. We'll see you on the other side. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sports Talk with Naj, man. We got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, man, we're going to be talking about the SEC. I'm going to be reacting to SEC Media Day, the first day, how it went, my thoughts on it, what stood out to me. And I'm going to be giving you my contenders, pretenders, and sleepers out of the SEC this year. Now, most people are picking this kind of a two-man horse race, basically between Alabama and Georgia, rightfully so. But there's some few teams in there that may surprise you going into next season, man. So without further ado, let's get into it, man. Hope you guys having a good week. All right, so for me, my reaction to SEC Media Day was the whole quarterback situation with Brian Kelly and their quarterbacks. They have four technically quarterbacks on the roster. Jaden Daniels, who they convinced to come from Arizona State. And they got Miles Brennan, told him to come back and return to Baton Rouge. And they also got younger prospects in Garrett Nussmeier, Walker Howard. So, you know, Kelly, he's content where Seton College are at heading into their camp. Of course, you guys know camp is starting pretty soon. But he's going to wait basically until fall camp to decide when he's going to have his quarterback. As from CBS Sports, where I got this quote, certainly we have four quarterbacks, Brian Kelly said. The spring really was for us to lay down our offense. We weren't really going to gear it towards any particular skill set. I feel much better about the depth in the quarterback situation. Jaden was really the only quarterback that had any experience. We're young and inexperienced at that position. I think the depth at quarterback is very much different. Jaden and certainly Miles brings obviously starting experience. Garrett, obviously, for me, is an exciting quarterback. Walker is a true freshman, but there's great depth there. Kelly told CBS Sports that three most important factors for him, essentially, at the decision-making process is whether they can take care of that football, get the ball in the hands of their playmakers, and they can extend plays when the plays breaks down. Now, if you guys all know, LSU had a tumultuous season last year. It was basically the end of, the name is kind of throwing me. Ed Ogeron, sorry, I couldn't think of the name. Ed Ogeron, basically, he left there, but he did bring LSU a title, basically, in 2019, 2020 team. And they were a great team, man. I mean, a historic team. Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jamar Chase. They had a whole bunch of great players on that team, man. And they were really special. Derek Stingley Jr. is another player. But really now they're in a different mode now. They brought in Brian Kelly, who was at Notre Dame. A lot of the reasons why they were in big games as well. They just couldn't get over the hump. So I think they have the right coach in order to do some damage here. But what's going to really be the question and what's going to really separate them is the quarterback position. That's always what it's been when you're playing these top-tier SEC teams and going in these big games. Can your quarterback perform? Can he come up to snuff? And right now, the quarterback situation is kind of a question mark because they're still all basically competing for who's going to start. We don't know if it's going to be Jaden Daniels. We don't know if it's going to be Miles Brennan. So we really have to see. So that's going to be where I'm going to be keeping my eye on for the LSU this season because that's, I think, going to make a determinant whether they could possibly be a sleeper team. It's always going to be that quarterback position. If you have a good to elite quarterback in the SEC or just in college football in general, more than likely you're going to win big games. More than likely you're going to be special. You're going to be in those games. So that's what I'm looking at from LSU camp. Basically, when we go into the season, which will be around September, who's going to be that starting quarterback? How well is he going to perform? And can he make some noise or can they make some noise out of the SEC West? Now, this may be a few years in the making to see what happens with them, but you saw when Joe Burrow transferred from Ohio State to LSU kind of what happened, and that wasn't a year everybody expected LSU to do damage. Kind of really just came out of nowhere. So that's why I kind of have them as a sleeper. I'm curious to see who is going to be starting quarterback, how well he can perform, and how this team is going to kind of mesh together in the new Brian Kelly regime. So that's one thing that really stood out to me. Also, Missouri's improved defense. Now, they're bringing back a lot of starters this year. Basically, for Mizzou, they had the second worst defense last year in the conference. It changed quite a bit then. Ex-defensive coordinator Steve Wilkes moved back up to the NFL. And then Coach Eli Drinkwitz promoted safeties coach Blake Baker in February, 1 month after he joined the program from LSU staff as a replacement. So they were returning. So according to the quote, we returned 9 defensive players that have 6 or more starts in their career, Drinkwitz said. We added transfer at every position on the defensive side of the ball to create competition and depth. And then also stood out to me, he had a great interview. I thought Martez Manuel, DB for Missouri. Basically, he has a wallpaper that said, he was projected as a 5th-round pick, and that, he took that going into the offseason, keeping it as a wallpaper as motivation and basically ambition in order to be more successful next year. So, you could see Drinkwitz really under the hot seat if this team doesn't perform well, which they haven't in a while. We'll see they're gonna bring at quarterback. The true freshman Sam Horn, who came from Collins Hill, probably is not going to play for another year, maybe 2. See how that goes. But they're under a lot of fire right now, especially the coach. But with you having 9 defensive starters, it should be a very much improved defensive team. The depth and the competition should lead to more elite and more good players coming out of the defense. So I'm curious to see how these non-returning starters are going to play this year. Obviously, still a team in rebuild mode, but I'm curious to see how they can perform, and how Martez Manuel, who had, like I said, phenomenal interviews all SEC Media Day at the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta. Curious to see how he's going to be able to perform this year, if he can have a better season and actually, project himself up in the draft rankings next year, and then possibly being, you never know, man. If you have a great season, you put one good season together, you can be all the way up to a, first-round draft pick. So I'm curious to see how he performs. We'll be keeping my eye on him, and also the coach, Drinkwitz, who they're going to start basically at that QB position, because I'm actually curious to see who they're going to start and if they can have a better season, because as I alluded to, they had the second worst defense basically last season. So that's who I'm keeping my eye on. And then basically the commissioner, Greg Sankey, basically said that Texas and Oklahoma is going to be the only 2 teams that they're going to basically bring into the conference, which starts July 1st, 2025. Basically talked about them being, one of the better, conferences in the league. And obviously it's a mega conference. It's a super conference. We know what the SEC means, and for them to bring in the elite fan base, in my opinion, of the Texas, who's been just deprived of, I wouldn't say competition, but deprived of being on the upper echelon, competing in big games, going and competing with everything on the line. So for me, I think adding them and adding OU is only going to help the SEC more than what it is now, create more fans, create, more hype, more high-profile matchups, which is really what you want. So as he alluded to, I think, it's great for the league. I think they're just going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and they're going to continue to bring in more and more revenue. I mean, obviously. And, I thought it was good that, as I alluded to a couple episodes ago, that the Big Ten landed USC and UCLA. But, again, these programs haven't been top tier for a long time. But I still think it's great because this exposes USC to more high-profile matchups and UCLA to more high-profile matchups when they play the Ohio States or the Michigans or, the Michigan States or the Penn States. This is, I think, going to be big for them down the line. So, as you alluded to, man, I mean, there's really nothing like the SEC. It's really the creme de la creme of college football. So, for them to add these 2 teams, I think says a lot, and we're going to see a lot of phenomenal matchups. Like, for me, I think what it really means in context is that it's not going to be a cakewalk anymore for, let's say, SEC West. No offense to Alabama. Obviously, they have competition there. Last year, they got beat by Texas A&M. But now you throw in a Texas and Oklahoma, who's probably going to be in the SEC West more than likely. Maybe one of the teams will be in the SEC East. We'll see how they kind of do that when that comes around. But you add a Texas in there, and you add Quinn Ewers in there, who's going to play, and then Arch Manning, who's going to probably who's going to be there when this whole thing kind of comes into fold and the SEC joins. I mean, Texas joins the SEC. I think you have better competition, better matchups, and maybe even more upsets. So, man, that's my take on it, and that's my reaction to SEC Media Day 1. Now, going into some contenders and pretenders, I think we all know who the contenders are. It's going to be Georgia and Alabama, obviously. Georgia actually beat Alabama. I think it was the first time a former coach alongside Saban actually beat him. So this is a big win, really, for Kirby Smart, as he couldn't get over the hump. Played him twice, actually, in the national championship game. Played him a couple years prior when they had lost in that walk-off touchdown from Tua Tagovailoa to Devontae Smith. But they got their revenge last year, and everybody's going to say, oh, well, injuries, Michi didn't play. Jameson Williams got hurt, in the game. But that was a really great, almost, you could say, historic defense in Georgia that really played well, kept going. And you could really say they didn't have an elite quarterback last year. JT Daniels has left. He had Stetson Bennett, who got the job done, but he's not an elite prospect. He's not even on most draft boards. And for Georgia to go win that, I think says a lot. And like I said, the biggest difference for Georgia is going to be, will they air off the football more? Are they going to – because it really is no QB controversy. I believe Stetson Bennett is going to start. So can he take that next step next year? That's my curious thing. Can he take that next step next year? Can he perform well? Can he be a great QB? So that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at for Georgia, because I think their defense is going to be great next year as well. I think they lost some players, but I think they've reloaded. And, I'm curious to see how the receivers are going to step up. I got Brock Bowers as like my number one tight end right now. And I think after the injury, I think he's going to come back with a vengeance next year and play and perform really well. So I think they've always had great running backs, and they've always been run-oriented. So I just want to see Kirby Smart kind of open it up more so that offense. And then for me, for Alabama, the biggest question marks is, okay, Bryce Young, Heisman Trophy winner. But he struggled really a lot in that national championship game. So can he follow up that Heisman Trophy winning season and get better? And he's going to have new receivers coming in because Jameson Williams left. I think Michi left. Like, a lot of his top receivers left, but he will have Cameron Tatu there. So, can he get him to develop? Can they develop alongside each other and grow and become better? So that's my biggest thing for Alabama. And their defense hasn't been as great as, that regime where he was like, oh, like, Alabama got that defense. Like, that Minka Fitzpatrick's, the Landon Collins, the elite linebackers, the elite edge rushers. So I'm curious to see how the young staff is going to come to be, what players are going to really stand out for Alabama, because they've always been known for the defense. But more recently, so they haven't really been that top-tier, upper echelon kind of a defense. So I'm curious to see how they're going to perform and what steps they're going to take. And we may be on another collision course between these two teams, between Georgia and Alabama, possibly meeting the SEC championship. So obviously, those two are the contenders. Those are my biggest questions. That's what I'm going to be keeping my eye on going into the next season. Now, as far as sleepers, when you have a top-tier recruiting class, now I'm also going to say he paid for it, obviously, and Jimbo Fisher, because I think they had the number one recruiting class. I think Alabama was second, maybe third or something like that. But I definitely have them as a team, I think, as a sleeper. I'm curious to see what Jimbo can do, and obviously with the animosity and them basically not being on good terms right now between Jimbo Fisher and actually Nick Saban. So I'm curious to see how they're going to perform. The biggest question for the Aggies is going to be DJ Durkin as he takes over from Mike Echo as a defensive coordinator. And there are only a couple multi-year starters that's going to be on Texas A&M. So I'm curious to see how that's going to perform. I'm going to keep my eye on Evan Stewart. He should be a focal point at wide receiver, and also the running back speedster, Devon Achin. Keep my eye on him as well. I definitely think he's going to fill into Isaiah Spiller's, spot this year. So I'm curious to see how he can perform with all the knocks on him. So that's really what I'm keeping my eye on, and I'm want to see how they can perform. Can they go and I have to check their schedule again, but if they play Alabama again, can they beat them? Can they force turnovers? How well will that defense perform? What's the quarterback going to do? So those are some of my questions for me. And then my other sleeper, which I just kind of alluded to, was going to be actually LSU. As I alluded to just a few moments ago, I definitely think I want to see who's going to be their quarterback. I like Brian Kelly being there because he's a top-tier coach in college football, in my opinion. I think you put I think you would do like tiers. You would do like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. You would do I still put Dabo up there, Dabo Sweeney, and then I think you would put like a Brian Kelly, and then you probably put like a Lane Kiffin, and then you will put his name, Lincoln Riley. I think so. Like for me, those are like the tiers of coaches that you would do in college football. Like if it was me, that's how I would pretty much rank them. So I think Brian Kelly's a top tier coach. Obviously, he had Notre Dame, in there and had them, performing, and had them knocking on the door. So this is the team that I'm keeping my eye on. Really, it's going to be for me the quarterback position. And that's why they're one of my sleepers. I believe in Brian Kelly. I know it's going to take time to mesh that team as a whole, but I'm curious to see how they come out and how they perform, as now he's playing with the big dogs now in the SEC. So that's going to be one of my sleepers. Another team to keep an eye on is actually going to be Arkansas, who had a pretty good season last year. They're going to have KJ Jefferson, showed a little offensively. And, he was the most improved, SEC's most improved player last fall. He went from the bottom of signal caller rankings to number 2 stats behind Bryce Young at the finish of last season. And then they did lose Treylon Burks to Tennessee, who he got drafted by. So they're going to need some players to pretty much step up. And then they added former 5-star Alabama linebacker Drew Sanders as well to the team in the transfer portal. So, I'm curious to see what steps KJ Jefferson can take next year. They had some big wins last season, and he really elevated his game as being number 2, basically, in the SEC, basically as the quarterback. So to go from the bottom, and then now you're here to number 2, how can he follow that season up? So that's another team I'm going to be keeping my eye on as well. I think going to have a great season next year too. So those are some of my sleepers we're going to see. And then to conclude the SEC section, my pretenders, obviously, now these aren't teams that are pegged to do some damage. These are teams that are pegged. They just have a lot of buzz around them, and a lot of it has to do with either a quarterback they just landed or the head coach. So one for me, I think a pretender is going to be South Carolina. He was really pegged as one of the top tier quarterbacks going into last season, Spencer Rattler. So he landed him, and they got Shane Beamer as the coach. They're number 9 heading into the SEC rankings basically this season. So I'm curious to see how he was a former 5-star. I'm curious to see how he deals with it now. He's probably going to be the guy there. He had adversity last season. There was a lot of drama out of Oklahoma. Caleb Williams actually eventually ended up leaving too and going with Lincoln Riley to USC. So I'm curious to see how Spencer Rattler is going to respond now to adversity. How he's going to perform next season. Is he going to have a clear head? And what South Carolina is going to do, because this has been another team that has been not really had a few good seasons, but hasn't really been there, So what can Spencer Rattler do? Is he that kind of a quarterback that can help lift the program out of obscurity, which this program has been, basically at the bottom. So I'm curious to see what he can do and what the staff can do. And that's why I say still got them as a pretender, because I got to see how Spencer Rattler is going to perform next season. And there's a lot of buzz kind of around South Carolina as it pertains to that. And then my other, hate to say it, pretender is going to be Ole Miss. I do like Lane Kiffin. Again, I have him as a top-tier coach in college football. They're coming off their first 10-win season last season. Had a lot of great prospects last year. Matt Corral got drafted. They had a really good team, and they surprised me. They did lose their bowl game eventually, but Lane Kiffin just signed the top-tier transfer class in the SEC per 24/7 Sports. Much needed as they try to replace Matt Corral, who got drafted by Carolina. And their top 3 wideouts from a season ago. So they lost their top 3 wideouts as well. So it's completely revamped with transfer additions of Jackson Dart from USC, Zach Evans, TCU, and Michael Trigg of USC. So they're obviously trying to revamp their whole offense. And then they also hired Charlie Weiss Jr. as a co-offensive coordinator with Jeff Lebby's departure to Oklahoma. So really, man, their biggest thing they have to replace there is their quarterback, Matt Corral. They did obviously add some pieces in Jackson Dart, Michael Trigg coming into the team, and Zach Evans. So I'm curious to see how they're going to perform coming into this new regime. And again, it's the same thing. Besides really Alabama and maybe Georgia, there's a lot of question marks at the main pivotal position, which is quarterback. So I'm curious to see who's going to be his starter, because it's obviously going to be a competition there at Ole Miss. And I'm curious to see how Lane Kiffin is going to follow up that 10-win season, because it's probably one of the better seasons Ole Miss has had in recent memory, obviously. So how is he going to follow up? How is Jackson Dart going to perform? How is Zach Evans going to come into it? How is Michael Trigg going to come into it? How are they going to get these players to mesh into their system and their scheme? And how will they look defensively? SEC, you got to be able to play. I mean, obviously it's an offensive-oriented league, but obviously you got to play some defense as well. So for me, that's what I'm keeping my eye on for Ole Miss. I don't think they'll be as good next season. So that's why I have them as a pretender, but I will be keeping my eye on them. So that's my reaction to SEC Media Day, and also some of my pretenders, contenders, and sleepers. So yeah, man, that's going to conclude this episode. Hope you guys liked it. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Peace.